right. I did it. We're live. Going to wait a few more minutes till we're at the technical start time to see if anybody joins us. But for those of you who are watching this at whatever point in time it may be, it's a beautiful day out here in Highlands. Short sleeve weather for sure. Going to try keeping my hat on while we're doing this. Hopefully I won't shadow my face too much. Little bit of a nature update before we get going. The birds are calling, which has been really neat. Listening to everybody. Saw an osprey over the lake the other day, which was cool. I wasn't aware that they came by here very much. Everything is green and growing at last. So that's what we'll be talking about today once we get started. For those of you who might not be able to make it here to the Nature Center, I'll give you a quick look around at what life is like right now. The spring peepers were calling earlier this morning. A whole bunch of birds are calling right now, but I don't think my microphone can pick it up. So it's an absolutely gorgeous day, and I really wish y'all could be here with me. All right, so I see some folks are joining me. Hello, welcome to my very first live stream. Feel free to throw in comments, shout out where you are, what the weather's like where you are right now. We're supposed to have a high of 70 today, so it's perfect weather for a tour. And I wish that you guys could be here in person with me. I think it's about ready to get going, so welcome to our very first live streaming tour. My name is Paige Engelbrechtson, and I am the Biological Foundation's Nature Center Education Specialist. The Nature Center is not open at this point in time, so we're shifting all of our programming as best we can to live streaming. We're going to give this a go and see how it works. Cell service is iffy here in the garden at the best of times, so please forgive us for any technical difficulties. If it's too difficult to see my face with a hat on, please let me know. I'll take it off. But it is bright, so I want to make sure I can see everything and point it out to you guys as we're going. A little bit of background: the biological station has been here for decades now, and our garden has also been here for decades, so there's an awful lot to see. With the arrival of spring, our garden and every season tour is designed to highlight what's changed in the last month. And for anybody who's up here in the mountains, you know since the first Monday in March, an awful lot has been changing. We are going to be highlighting our spring ephemeral group today. Normally this tour would be about an hour and would go through the majority of the botanical garden. I'm going to try and keep it condensed so you guys don't spend a lot of time watching me wander around the garden. But if you have any questions at any point in time, please feel free to shout out in the comments and I'll do my best to answer it. I've got some reference books. Good morning, Michael. Wish that you could be here, but glad that you can join. If you have a question I don't know the answer, especially if you leave it in the comments, I will do my best to get back to you guys. So we are going to walk through our azalea garden, which is a beautiful stretch of garden. I'm going to flip this around for you all. Hey, Jane, we're glad that we can do this. And if you guys have any ideas about what we can do for you while this is all going on, please let us know and we'll see what we can do. So I'm kind of doubling back to the front of the Nature Center because I want to highlight one spring ephemeral that is in absolutely gorgeous condition today. Please note, I'm going to go off-road, but as long as you're staff, please stay on the path. If you're not staff, please stay on the path. So this beautiful flower, good morning, Vicky. This is bleeding heart. It's Dicentra eczema. Please forgive my Latin. And you guys can see, if I can get it to focus well, good enough. It gets its name from the color and the shape. It doesn't actually produce any kind of blood-like substance. That honor goes to bloodroot, which produces a toxic red sap from its root structure. So please make sure not to mess with that. But both bloodroot and bleeding heart are part of that group that we call spring ephemerals. And the name is actually pretty revealing about what is unique about this group. Today, Again, gorgeous weather. 70 degrees is going to be the high, and it's been what I would consider to be good weather for about the last 3 weeks. But I saw my first spring ephemeral at the very beginning of March. Skunk cabbage, for those of you who might be familiar with it. It's like a purple red shell about this big that hides a cluster of white and yellow flowers. And that was blooming well before it was what I would consider to be spring, and what the calendar certainly considered to be spring. So as we walk to the next portion of the tour, I'd like for you guys to shout out in the comments, if you would like to, what it is that you think spring means to a group of wildflowers that are going absolutely bonanza here in the garden right now. And yes, Jane, I would certainly agree. Nature is keeping me sane right now. Our infamous butterfly selfie stand here for you guys if you come through the Botanical Garden. Although the Nature Center is closed, the Botanical Garden is open year-round, dawn to dusk, so you're welcome to come and visit if you're already in the area. Just make sure to practice social distancing. All right, so this portion of the trail is what we call Woodland Way, and it has been an absolute joy to watch over the last few weeks. A lot of different things keep popping up and going away. We have a very small example of celandine poppy in the yellow here. Our shooting stars are right there. It'll take them a little bit longer to get going, but they're about ready to go. Our blue cohosh is right over here, and that is flowering in other parts of the garden already. These guys are really trying to get going. Over here we have our toad trillium. Again, I'm going to come off-road just to give you guys a better close-up. It's also known as Sweet Betsy, which I think is a kinder name for them. And we'll be talking about trillium at the very end of this short tour. But I want to point out for you guys right now, just so you can see, the flower itself sits right on top of what appear to be leaves. That's going to be a little different from what we're going to see further into the garden. Here's some older version of Bleeding Heart. You can see, if I can focus, maybe. All right, apparently not. The older version of Bleeding Heart, you can see the change in color, that deeper, richer red color compared to this finer, pale pink. In some flowers, the color change actually tells the pollinators whether or not the nectar's gone and it's already been pollinated, which is a really neat adaptation. And here's another lovely little yellow trillium. Again, the flower sits directly on top of what appear to be leaves. All right. For those of you who perhaps just joined us, the question that I'm hoping you'll think about as I'm walking is, what does spring mean for our spring ephemerals? How do they define that? I certainly wouldn't have said it was spring in the very beginning of March, but they were happy to get going. Over here we have a whole bunch of chickweed blooms. These are the very small white flowers, those dainty little black dots. Yes, trilliums are absolutely one of my favorites too. We have so many species here in the garden, and over 30 in southern Appalachia as a whole. So there are plenty to see. I'm gonna skirt around our entrance here. So I want to highlight, we saw some smaller poppy in the Woodland Way, but here are some really beautiful examples of what it looks like. This yellow color is very cheery, especially on those gloomier days. And those gloomier days are part of what tells the spring ephemerals that it's time to get going. I'll switch around so I can pretend like I'm talking to you guys in person. the definition of spring depends on what group you're talking about. For some taxa or species, it's is there snow? For some, it's is there rain? In February, when it was raining and it wasn't freezing, I noticed a lot of the American toads and spotted salamanders were like, yes, this is it, spring has arrived, let's get going. Not so with our trillium and our other spring ephemerals. What they're paying attention to is how warm is it. As the sunlight is coming and hitting the ground, they're waiting to see how warm the ground is, how warm the ambient temperature is. And their definition of warm doesn't necessarily meet mine. But yes, it is actually that burst of joy and aliveness for them. That's what they're focusing on. They are attempting to come up out of the ground as soon as it's hopefully warm enough they won't die in a frost, flower, well, leaf, then flower, hopefully get pollinated by their insect pollinators, seed, and then die back. And they do this on what for plants is a very short time scale. So, you know, when you think about trees take months to go through their whole life cycle or reproductive cycle. Our spring ephemerals usually come and go in a matter of weeks. So it's very brief. That's why we call them ephemerals. And they're waiting for the ground in that area to get warm enough for them to come up. But it's a huge gamble. So if you're a gardener, you might be familiar with the idea that around here, it's not usually safe to put plants out until later in the spring, April or even May. Last year I was battling to keep my young blueberry bushes alive until what felt like Mother's Day. So our spring ephemerals are running a huge risk by popping up when they think it's just warm enough. In a prolonged cold snap, or in an unexpected snowfall, they could potentially die. This above ground structure of the plant could die, and they could lose their whole chance to reproduce for the year. But it's not their whole chance to reproduce forever, because if we were to dig down underneath our poppy or our trillium or the other spring ephemerals that we're going to be looking at, we would find an underground storage organ known as a rhizome or a corm or a bulb, depending on how it's composed. And that underground storage structure is actually going to stay present year-round. So our spring ephemerals are perennials. They're going to keep coming back year after year, as long as they've got enough energy in that storage unit to keep leafing out, getting energy, and dying back. So they're risking losing an entire year, but not the entire plant when they pop up in the spring, or what they consider to be spring. And actually, we're just going to take a short walk now down our botanical garden entrance steps and think about why they're willing to risk losing an entire reproductive cycle. And in fact, looking around the botanical garden entrance right now, especially at the ground, we're seeing a good indicator of why it's worth it to them to risk freezing to death. Any ideas about what I'm noticing? I'm going to keep moving on. And our next stop is actually right here. So these guys, I see 2 spring ephemerals right now. Bonus points to anybody who's spotted them with me. What we have May apple, which has a leaf structure that's beautiful, like an asterisk or star. Yes, exactly. Serena has it. It is sunlight. So right here, it's pretty shady. We've got a little bit of dappled sunlight over there. When I was out here scouting things out just an hour ago, this whole area was in that dappled, mottled sunlight. These guys and the other spring ephemerals we've seen have been growing underneath trees. Right now, you can see an awful lot of sunlight. We have some hemlocks in the way, we've got some rhododendron, but I see a whole ton of blue. In another few weeks, that is absolutely not going to be the case. We've got a red maple right over here that has been flowering and graciously dropping its blossoms on me as I've been walking by. and everybody else is gearing up to start leafing out. When that does happen, those leaves are going to keep this area permanently in shade. This beautiful sunlight that we've got now on the forest ground is going to completely vanish. And at that point, our spring ephemerals are going to have a really hard time getting enough sunlight to store enough energy for the next year. So they are saying, you know what, it's just warm enough, it's just sunny enough, we are going to pop up as quickly as we can, risk a potential snowfall, and see if we can't get enough energy to store in those underground root structures to hang on for the next year. Part of that storage system, the way they pop up, try and grab enough sunlight, put it away, pop up, grab more energy the next year, means that it takes them an awful long time to reach the point where they have enough energy to produce enough leaves to flower. Actually, these two right here are great examples of that. So, May apple with one leaf has no reproductive structures whatsoever. But May apple with two leaves has a wee little flower here that hasn't quite opened yet. In many of these spring ephemerals, that means that the underground structure has enough energy in order to reproduce, that it can afford to put all that effort into a flower and then a seed. Fun fact that I learned actually last week watching a Discovery Place nature guided nature tour is that box turtles love to eat the fruit of the May apple. The fruit is actually edible, but everything else about it is not. And the other plant that we have here, I'm going to zoom in so you guys can get a better look. Anybody know what this one is? This one is trout lily. It gets its name from the mottled color of its leaves. It's said to represent or appear similar to the mottled side of a brook trout. And they have these beautiful little yellow flowers that right now you can see, actually two of them, pointing isn't great, they're starting to curve backwards. Other flowers that are more in shade are still drooping, which means they're essentially closed for business. But as it warms up and the sunlight comes out, the petals will peel back and open up so the pollinators can get in. And the trout lily that you see with flowers have two leaves. Any trout lily that you might see with just one leaf is not going to flower. It just doesn't have that capacity. And we get an up close version right here of what that beautiful speckled color looks like. These guys are actually really cool. I've heard that colonies can be over 100 years old. And again, just that system of soaking up just enough sunlight, just enough energy, and then going dormant for the summer means it takes them a really long time to reach the stage where they can flower. Typically between 4 to 7 years is what I've seen for a number of different species. Yes, I'm glad that you guys are able to join us at home. We're going to move over here towards our woodland loop. Again, you can really get that beautiful mottled sunlight on the ground, really shining on this galax, which is a beautiful characteristic plant here in southern Appalachia. And we're moving to what's going to be our last stop on this very abbreviated garden tour. Over here, I bet you can guess what group these plants belong to. These are more Trillium. I'm going to step over here a little bit off-road. Before we get to the Trillium, I want to highlight these beautiful, delicate little flowers. These are known as Carolina Spring Beauties. They are another spring ephemeral. And in fact, a dozen of these flowers could be coming up from the same underground root structure. They very much, they have a really big corm system, that underground structure that holds the energy. And each corm can send up many branched different structures. And I'm noticing, perhaps you might not be able to see it, there's a lot of small insects flying around here. Yes, I completely missed them the first summer that I was here in spring that I was here in Highlands last year. So I'm glad to get to notice them this time around. And what I learned when I was researching them is that they'll only open when conditions are right for their pollinators. When I came out this morning and took a look at them, the flowers were all curled up and closed, kind of like those trout lily flowers. You know, they knew their pollinators weren't going to be out, so they didn't want anybody else to come and interfere with their business. They were waiting for the bees and the flies to come pollinate them. And these guys actually have a specific pollinator. There's a bee out there that will only feed its young on the pollen of the spring beauties. So the male and female will come out from underground where they've spent the whole winter. They'll mate, and then the female will come to these flowers and she'll gather up the pink pollen in these huge pouches on her lower legs. At which point she'll fly back and she'll have excavated a long burrow about 15 centimeters long. And she'll take that pollen, she'll roll it into a ball, into a cake. She'll put it at the end, she'll lay one egg on it, and then she'll seal it up and keep going. Pollen cake, egg, pollen cake, egg. When the young emerge, they are going to eat the pollen, turn into adults, and then spend the whole rest of the year through the winter in that underground egg chamber. And it's only the next spring, when the ground warms up enough and the spring beauty should be blooming, that they'll emerge as adults to repeat the cycle. So it's cool how specific things can be. Yes, Serena, I agree. These little things that you'll blink and you'll miss, it's amazing. They're very specially adapted to not only survive in these very short spans of time, but also make sure that they reproduce. That's the whole point of a flower. You could argue it's the whole point of a plant, to make sure that you do successfully seed. And that's where I want to talk about our beautiful trillium here. Trillium meaning tri, we see again those 3 leaves. These aren't actually leaves, these are specialized structures called bracts, which you normally find at the base of a flower, for example. But they look and function essentially like leaves, so you wouldn't be wrong to call them that. Tri meaning 3, it has 3 of these bracts. If we look at the flower, it has 3 sepals and 3 petals. And this is called a nodding trillium. If you notice, this one actually has a stem, and it hangs down underneath the the bracts. So you might completely miss, for example, on this one, that it is in fact flowering. And the trilliums are a great example of that final step in a spring ephemeral strategy. So we've sensed that it's warm. Our underground root structure has sent up leaves. We've soaked up enough energy. We've got enough energy to put up flowers. We've been pollinated, and we can produce seeds. And the trilliums are perhaps the most noticeable one, which is why I wanted to focus on it. If you're walking around southern Appalachia in the later part of the spring and summer, you'll see, weirdly enough, these bracts are still up, these leaves are still up. You still see where the trillium are. Normally, all these other plants that we've got, our spring beauty, our trout lily, our mayapple, they are going to be gone in a few weeks. But you'll still see the trillium up, and sitting on top of it, like a large rose hip, will be a fruit. It's not actually a true fruit. It's got a seed inside of it, and then wrapped around about the size of my knuckle, for the ones that I've seen around here, is a structure we call an elaiosome. It's this big fatty wrapping around the seed that's delicious, and animals and especially insects love it. So that elaiosome will be sitting on the trillium, and it falls off or it's eaten. But especially ants, they'll come, they'll take that elaiosome with the seed inside, and they'll bring it back to their colony. And unfortunately, I don't have any visible ant colonies to show you right here. I looked, but I'm not that great at spotting them, apparently. And the ants will take that elaiosome back to their colony. They'll eat the elaiosome for the nutrients it provides, and then they'll throw the seed in what's essentially the garbage heap of the ant colony, which happens to be the perfect place for that seed to start growing. So that seed will grow, it'll send up next spring, it'll send up a leaf, it'll soak up energy, it'll die back when it gets too shaded. Next year, it'll send up a leaf, soak up more energy, die back, and repeat until it's finally got enough energy stored to put up 3 leaves and flower. Oftentimes, because they're dispersed by ants, the seeds won't go more than 6 feet from the original parent plant. So, similar to our trillium patch here, you'll often find trillium very close together in these dense groups. I've seen beautiful photos of trillium that absolutely carpet a hillside. And if they don't seed, if for whatever reason they're either too young to have a flower, this guy's got one poking under there, but this trillium, for example, no flower structure. Once it starts to get shaded, it'll die back. If it's not pollinated, it'll also die back. So in the next few weeks, most of these trillium will probably vanish. But I'm glad that I got the chance to share them with you now. That is, in essence, the gist of what I wanted to talk about on our tour today. I figured you guys a little bit punchier might be better, but we're always looking for new ideas and for feedback. So if there's something you'd like to see, if you guys have questions now, I'm happy to walk around the garden and see if I can find something for you. Or if there's something in the future you want to see, one of these every week while our spring ephemerals are going, or you'd love more posts with activities or more write-ups in our newsletters, please let us know. I really wish you guys could be here, and we're trying to make sure that as distant as we may be, we're still able to reach out and connect. So our next scheduled garden tour isn't until the first Monday in May. That's according to our pre-planned schedule. But if there is more demand or more interest, especially if I can find more content, we would be happy to do this again. Yes, thank you very much, Jane. I would absolutely love to do this more. We're certainly going to see a lot more continue to change here in the garden, and bringing it to you in whatever fashion we can. We'd like to. So sign up for our newsletters if you like. You hopefully already follow us on Facebook, but that way you'll get notifications about any more events that we do. I think that's everything that I had to wrap up with. So yes, if you have any questions, please comment on the stream, and we'll, again, do our best to get back to you. But until the next time, thank you so much for joining or watching in the future if you are. And hopefully we can continue giving you things to look forward to. All right. Thank you. See you soon.